Once upon a time, in a very far-away small village, there lived a little boy called Neil. Every day after school, he would take the geese to the river to play. He was a very mischievous boy. Often he would bully the animals. He likes to pull on the cat's whiskers. He would hold on to the goose's fur and try riding around. In the flock of the geese, Neil really likes to play with a goose called Martin, but they never got along with each other because of the way Neil mistreated him. On a day in the month of March, his parents were gone to the market. Because Neil was always playful and didn't do well in school, his parents had asked him to stay home and do some studying. Neil stared at the book, but couldn't keep his mind on it so slowly, he put his head down on the table and fell asleep. A tinkling sound disturbed Neil from his sleep. Rubbing his eyes, he tried to look around. His mom's sewing basket had fallen down. Is there a thief or something in the house? Neil asked himself. Suddenly, he saw a little man in blue with a white beard coming out from his mom's wardrobe and standing on the edge of a box. Neil was surprised. He wondered to himself if that man was an elf. Suddenly, he had an idea. He took the butterfly net and swung it and caught the elf, so then the elf was trapped inside of the net. Neil kept tossing the net around and made the elf really dizzy. The elf begged him, saying, "Please let me go. I'll give you a big present to thank you." When Neil heard that, he got really excited, so he put the net on the table, and the elf got out of it. The elf looked at him angrily, and then said, "This is the present I am going to give you. Keep it, little kid." Suddenly, blinding rays of light appeared, and Neil couldn't open his eyes anymore. All of a sudden, Neil found himself becoming smaller, and finally he was so small that he stood on a book. The book seemed like a bed, and everything around him seemed so huge. Neil couldn't believe his eyes. He walked into the yard, and he had to look high up just to see the head of the goose, and the cow's legs seemed like 4 tall pillars. All the animals were giants compared to him. The animals in the yard saw the thumb-sized Neil. They laughed and said, "Now you can't bully us anymore." Neil was surprised that he could understand the animals' language, and then they all got together and started to tease him. They pulled his shirt, pecked his head, and Martin used his wings to slap Neil's little body. Just then, a group of wild geese flew over. Martin was so excited to see them. He started to shout and jump. He cheered as if he was going to fly too. Neil saw that Martin was so eager to fly. He knew that he was the strongest and the best goose that the farm had, and that he shouldn't fly away. So he quickly tied a string around Martin's neck and screamed, "Don't run!" Martin didn't really care about Neil. He started to chase the wild geese, and soon he was up in the air together with them with Neil on his back. Neil was so scared and just kept his eyes closed. He could hear the wind blowing as it passed by his ears. The group of wild geese flew in a straight line. Martin was trying hard to catch up with them from behind. The one leading the group was a goose called Oscar. She looked very old, and her fur was not fluffy anymore. Neil shouted, "Stupid goose, stop! I'm going to fall down!" While he was trying to get Martin's attention, he slowly climbed to his neck, holding the fur tightly. But Martin didn't want to waste any more time listening to him. He was fully focused on flying ahead. The wild geese flew across Neil's village and a mountain, heading towards a lake that was far away. Martin flew just as fast as the wild geese. He seemed like he had forgotten that he was a farm goose. It was already evening when the geese started to slow down and hit the ground. Martin couldn't manage anymore. He looked like a plane that had lost its control and was heading for a crash. Neil opened his mouth and closed his eyes. He held the string very tightly. Martin crashed by the tree beside the lake. Neil also fell down very hard. Looking at Martin lying there without moving, Neil rushed to him and patted his head. He tried to call his name, but no response came. Neil quickly got some water to give to poor Martin. After a while, Martin woke up and realized that Nils was patiently feeding him some water. Martin then felt that Nils wasn't that annoying after all. So to thank him for what he did, he decided to go to the lake and catch a fish for him. The night came, and the geese prepared to take a rest on the lake. They were so astonished to see Martin. He had beautiful white, snowy fur. Martin told the rest of the geese that it was his first time flying. Since he was born, he had been dreaming of a day when he could fly to the beautiful La Bolan, just like the rest of the wild geese. He wasn't afraid of flying, and surely no fear of tiredness. Oscar really admired the brave Martin, so she decided to accept him into the group. Then after that, Nils, who had been hiding under Martin's wings, came out and listened to them. Suddenly, a wild goose screamed and asked, "What is that? He's a strange-looking little man?" When they heard that Nils was a human, they were all frightened and rushed backwards. Everyone was discussing on how to chase Nils away, so Martin was worried when he heard that. He thought, "It was late at night. Where would he go? And he has saved my life." Finally, he tried to beg Oscar to let Nils stay for just one night. Then the kind Oscar finally agreed to that. That night there was a bright full moon. The wild geese slept peacefully, keeping their heads inside their wings. Nils was cuddled by Martin under his wings, but Nils just couldn't sleep. He thought maybe because it was the first time he was away from home for such a long time. That night, a very sly fox named Smear was walking around, trying to hunt for some prey. His sharp eyes were wide opened while he sniffed around. Suddenly, he found Martin and the wild geese resting by the lake. He then slowly crept to the lake, used his sharp teeth, and quickly grabbed a wild goose by the lake and escaped with it in his jaws. Nils heard something and woke up. He saw that Smear had caught one of the wild geese and was running towards the dark forest. He chased him and shouted, "Stop, you thief!" The fox was curious and turned around to take a look, and he saw the little-sized human shouting at him. Smear was so surprised to see him. At that same moment, the wild goose saw his opportunity and managed to shake himself out of the fox's mouth and ran away. The fox had lost the prey that he had found, so he became very angry. He tried to attack Nils, but Nils managed to escape from him and quickly climbed up a tree. The fox tried to jump as high as he could, but still it was not high enough to reach Nils. So he just stayed around the tree and shouted at Nils every now and then, cursing him for spoiling his good hunting. He was sure that he would have Nils for his supper. So the fox stayed up all night. When the sun arose, Nils saw the wild geese flying in the sky across the forest. He wondered to himself, "Where are they going? Are they leaving me behind?" He was feeling disappointed. Just when he thought that he was being left behind, Martin and the wild geese surprised him and came flying back through the trees to attack the fox. Smear was so frightened and just covered his head and prowled around. Martin took the opportunity and flew up to the tree to save Nils. All the wild geese then flew away free from danger. Smear was very angry and silently promised himself to take revenge on Nils and the other wild geese someday. Okar was so grateful to Nils for he had saved her friend. All of them gathered at the lake and cheered because of Nils' bravery. After that, Nils became good friends with them all.